And please join now in a spirit of meditation and prayer as we deepen into our service. And I'm going to share opening words for this morning by Stephen Kendrick. We are here to face the truth about ourselves, about this faith we love, and the ways it presently serves others and the world, as well as to open ourselves to ways it can be better and more joyfully reflect our potential and core values. We want to know the ways we are bound to one another, as well as to larger religious movements normally beyond our sight and vision. We say we are open and diverse, yet it is too easy to feel stuck in old paths and stubborn habits reflecting not so much tradition as our comfort. We want to answer the call to service, to a world that needs our message, our hope, our revived energy. We are gathered to learn, to unlearn, to hear, and to move forward. Amen. My pleasure to introduce Carl Williams. And I have some things about him that I will read that I have not memorized, but I also wanted to say that that I work with Carl at the Water Protector Legal Collective, and it's been, I guess it was late March that he first came into Bismarck, or at least that's the first time I met him here, and it's been a pleasure to have you with the collective, and I'm excited to be able to introduce him to all of you who don't already know him. So Carl Williams is a movement lawyer dedicated to creating the conditions where people are free from all systems of oppression. Carl has practiced criminal and civil rights law in Massachusetts for over 12 years. He began his legal career as a criminal defense attorney with the Roxbury Defenders. More recently, he served as racial justice attorney with the ACLU of Massachusetts. And he is currently the executive director of the Water Protector Legal Collective, defending indigenous movements that are defending the earth and water. He is a longtime member of the National Lawyers Guild and has served as a chair of its Massachusetts board. Carl was a distinguished lecturer on public interest law at Northeastern University School of Law and a practitioner in residence at Cornell Law, teaching a course on the history and theory of movement lawyering.
I have a twin brother, an identical twin brother, and a lot of places in my life I certainly wouldn't be a lawyer. I probably wouldn't be an activist and an organizer if it weren't for my brother. Because I think in many ways we've, in our lives, built off of each other. And we're very, very, like if I walked out and he walked in, you would just say, how did you change your clothes so fast? But one piece of advice, my brother, before we both became lawyers, a thing that my brother told me, he did some computer work, and he also taught some computer technical stuff. And he always told me, he's like, if you ask an audience or students a trick question, you should always tell them that it's a trick question. So this is my warning. I'm about to ask a trick question. In the history of the United States, the powers that be invented, created what was arguably, and that means that I want to argue about it, what was arguably the most deadly invention in the history of humankind. And I actually said this one time in front of folks from Massachusetts Peace Action. Do people know the Peace Action movement? Peace Action was initially called Nuclear Disarmament. They're actually the organization, the English version that started the peace symbol, because the peace symbol is actually representation of N and D. So I spoke to them, and they were like, of course, you mean nuclear weapons. And I said, no, actually, I mean something else. I mean something that was invented in the United States of America several hundred years ago for a very particular reason, for a very destructive reason, that has caused, in the United States and around the world, genocide, death of thousands, if not millions of people. And that is the idea of white supremacy and the idea of whiteness, right? It was probably the creation that was the most devastating othering in the history of the world. It allowed the Holocaust in Europe. It allowed I actually am very specific when I talk about genocide in the United States, but it allowed the genocide, and a lot of times when people talk about the genocide against indigenous people, they say the genocide, but it wasn't. That was scores, if not hundreds of genocides, right? Because people who were, Algonquin weren't connected to the Sioux, weren't connected to people in the Pueblos. This was hundreds of nations of people, some that their entire linguistic groups, their entire identities no longer exist. And that was because one group of people said, we are something, and they are something different. And we can kill them, we can destroy their food supplies, we can wipe them off the face of the earth. And initially, when the colonies in the United States, when the colonizers came from Europe and came to the United States, there wasn't an identity. So if you look in the 1600s and 1700s, there wasn't an identity that people said, we are white and they are not. Initially, what were those words? We are Christians. Well, I should say they. They are Christians. The people who coming from Europe said, we're Christians. And what are they? Savages, right? That was the word. People said, we're Christians, and if you're being nice, maybe heathens, but those people are savages. But then there was a problem, because some people were converted, right? And they're like, well, we need a way to make them something different. And what is it? Well, they're not really human. And this was done for black folks. This was done for indigenous folks. And it was this absolutely all-powerful othering, right? And the legendary human rights lawyer Brian Stevenson talks about, in Europe, there was a reckoning with the system of white supremacy that happened. After World War II, Germany and the allied countries, the countries that were allied with Germany, the Axis powers, had some reckoning of, wow, we had this belief system that was really problematic, and we did these things that were horrible. Now we're going to incorporate some things in our education systems, in our political systems, in our legal systems, so we don't do that. So we understand the horrors of that. In the United States, the active genocide of indigenous people, the active enslavement of black people, that was never, some of those things in some ways, and I certainly don't want to say that it stopped in all ways, some of those things in some ways were discontinued. Some of those things stopped, right? The active enslavement, chattel slavery was made illegal. And then there were other systems that were put in place to control people. But there was never that psychological, let's deal with the ideas that allowed us to have that system, right? That the evil of that system. So I just put that as a sort of foundational structure of the United States, which is hard to deal with. Many times I've stood in front of a lectern and sort of, like pounded my fist and said, the Constitution protects these rights. It protects us, and it does. However, in that same Constitution, I'm a bit of a nerd, and some folks have heard me say this before, but if you actually look at the main body of the United States Constitution, it's about 2,500 words. This is without the amendments, without the Bill of Rights and the further amendments. It's about 2,500 words. About 250 words of it, so about 10% of the United States Constitution, is owning human beings, protecting the law to own human beings, stating that black people only are counted for 3/5 of a human being, and that wasn't for a good thing, it was for proportional representation, so that states that enslaved people would get more representation in Congress and would also get more electoral votes, and ultimately several of the Republican presidents that have been elected in the past with not the popular vote. But 3/5 proportional representation. So said, black people, you only count for 3/5, and we're not even talking about the Bill of Rights. And Native people, in that same sentence in the Constitution, it talks about Native people, and people know how many fifths Native people counted for in that sentence? In Article 1? 0/5, right? It counts as 0. So I think those things, that foundational structure of the United States Constitution, and then separately we can talk about the Declaration of Independence, and a lot of people go, oh, the Declaration of Independence is nicer because in the beginning words it really talks about freedom and equality, but then when it gets down to the points, the list of points that the fledgling United States were petitioning the British Crown for and saying these are the problems he has incited, and it lists he, and he is the King of England. It says he has incited domestic insurrections of the merciless savages, right? So basically, of the time, today they would say terrorists probably, but talking about Native people and using this very barbaric, this very othering. They didn't say use racialized terms, but use that savage term, because this, again, was the 1600s in 1776. That language was the foundational language of what now people call settler-colonialism, right? That there's an idea that there's not just colonialism, not just we're going to go, what England did, let's say, to India. We're going to go put a government over these people, control their economy, their politics, the raw materials they produce, profit off of that in the home country. But settler colonialism is in addition to that, right? No, we're actually going to take our people and put our people there. That means we're going to take the land. We're going to take all of the structures. So that idea of settler colonialism was somewhat part and parcel with that creation of that system, that deadly system called white supremacy. And that is written into our foundational documents. And if it wasn't clear enough in the Declaration of Independence and in the Constitution, in the American Revolution itself, right? I actually just looked this up a little while ago because I was thinking, like, how many people do you need? How much of the population do you need to really change a political system? And this is not a trick question. What percent of the people that they were counting at the time, which really means sort of white, Christian, landowning, literate men, at the time of the American Revolution, what percent of the population do people think supported the idea of going to war with the most powerful nation in the world at the time, Britain? What percent do people think? Someone can say a number. Any other guesses? Give me a number. 50. Like, I would have thought it would have been in, like, strong double digits, like 20, 30, 40, but you're super close. It's depending on how you count, it's between 13 and 16%. That's a lot. I mean, that's a pretty low number to do a pretty drastic thing. But that's so how do you get to have a revolutionary war? The one way you have it is you convince people in the South, you know what? Britain just outlawed slavery. How's that going to work for you guys? Virginia was one of the most aggressive supporters of the idea of a revolutionary war. And we don't have a time machine and we don't have mind-reading machines, but one of clearly the reasons, it's hard to say how much, was because they said, if we don't go to war with these people, they are going to abolish chattel slavery in this country or in these colonies. And then how are we going to have our economy? How are we going to imagine what Virginia would have been in 1776 without chattel slavery? So I think that structure, that put in place, explains how sort of manifest destiny, how the genocides that happened across the continent were created. It was this creation of othering. And that's the depressing part. The good part is the way we can fight against this. And because you have someone create a system of white supremacy, a system of settler colonialism, all of the people who've been victimized by that, right, can come together and say, hey, we don't want to be part of this system. That is, Latinx people, that is women, that is immigrants, that's Two-Spirit and LGBTQ folks, that is, Muslims and Arabs, black folks, folks who want to live on a planet that is capable of supporting life. All of those people are the others, right? And that's almost everyone on the planet. That's almost everyone in the United States, right? So I think one of the things that inspires me and makes my heart feel good is that just about almost 3 years ago now, the largest gathering of human beings doing one thing collectively in the history of humanity, right? When the Women's March happened in 2016, whatever that was, January 20th, 2016, or somewhere around 17th, of 2017, yes, was the largest gathering of people collectively doing, except for like watching TV, which I'm not going to really count that as doing something, but the largest collection of people actually physically doing something ever. There's no comparison ever. There was a woman in sort of really rural Wyoming. I guess that's repeating myself because Wyoming's kind of rural, but really rural Wyoming, and was at a nursing home. And she was like, I want to go to the Women's March. And they're like, we're not driving you 4 hours to go to the Women's March. And she's like, no, I really want to go to the Women's March. And they're like, sorry, we can't. And the women that were caring for her in the nursing home said, well, she really wants to go to the Women's March. And they gave her a sign, she put it on her lap, and they wheeled her around the nursing home. So I just say that because we're definitely going to win. It is absolutely a fact. The forces fighting for liberation because of that woman in Wyoming, because of all of the people, like the 2 or 4 million people that were in Washington, D.C., and New York, and Boston, and L.A., and Miami, and Chicago, in Bismarck. Y'all had a Women's March? You had to, because it happened. They had it in Wyoming, so you had one here. So that solidarity, the most radical thing that we can do now is cross traditional lines and stand in solidarity with people. That's why I think, one, the Women's March, secondly, Standing Rock and the No DAPO movement, that those actions of solidarity, people standing together and saying, we're not going to take this for our LGBTQ and Two-Spirit brothers and sisters and siblings. We're not going to take it for our Arab and Muslim brothers and sisters. We're not going to take it for other folks who may be immigrating to this country. We're not going to take it for black folks in the Black Lives Matter movement and people standing up for the environment. And all of us together can, and that's what actually, I'll just say directly politically, about the current political situation in this country is because people feel like they're going to lose. And that's why you saw this gasp of reactionary. It's why you saw this gasp of, things that start, people who are clearly, allied with what's going on in the United States, people who are neo-fascists, right? They're like, we really want our imaginary idea of what this country used to be, and it's an imaginary idea, but an imaginary idea of what this country used to be, that is why they're afraid. That is why, and this is sort of like, I don't know, I used to watch cartoons when I was a kid. This is sort of like the Wile E. Coyote hanging from the last little tiny branch, and it's going boink, boink, and it's about to fall. That's them, and we need to be there to, I don't know, we're the roadrunner, I guess, in this, and we need to be there standing on the cliff going, yep, it's going to be bad. Because you're holding on, and I'll say that's an idea, that's not a person, because I'm at a UU and I don't want to encourage violence. But that's that idea. That is that old idea withering away and dying. But we need to be there to push it. And one of the things I'll say, just in terms of solidarity, a very easy thing, I think our other coworker, Leola, probably said, she certainly said this because she always says it, when she was here last week or 2 weeks ago? 2 weeks ago, we can act in solidarity with people who are currently imprisoned, people who stood up for people's rights. And there are many of them, and there are ones specifically from Standing Rock who are still in prison for standing up for the environment, for standing up for water, for standing up for indigenous liberation. And I'll give you 3 very specific things people can do. People can write to them, right? And if you've never written to a person in prison, one of the things that you may find very shocking is that they will write back to you because they're in prison and they have a lot of time. So writing to someone in prison connects you in a way that is incredibly powerful, incredibly empowering, also really depressing and sad sometimes, but you can bring some light to someone who is in a very, very dark and terrifying place. I'll give you, I just want to list the 3, and I'll give you a place that you can find that stuff. The other thing is much more difficult, but if we're trying to act in solidarity and we're trying to fight the terrible things that are happening here, is visit someone. Like really, like people could plan a little time out of vacation and visit, one of the folks. It takes a little bit more coordination, and people would certainly have to be amenable to the visit, but it's very unlikely that they wouldn't be. But visit someone who's in prison, one of the Standing Rock prisoners, or someone else who's in prison, because they're dark places that light rarely reaches into, and very, very scary things are happening. So visit someone, and lastly, support folks. Tiny amounts of money onto someone's commissary, that is their account when they're in prison, money that they can use for food, for medicine, for the most simple things like toiletries or clothing. while they're in prison, because those things are being more and more cut back, what people have access to when they're in prisons and jails. People can go to, I'll just say the whole website, which is sort of easy to remember, but it's no-politicalprisoners.org, no-politicalprisoners.org, and it has all of the prisoners listed. It has some of their stories and ways that you can support them and ways that you can write to them. You can also...
We have that in the hallway.
Oh, great, it's in the hallway, yeah. And, or you can just go to Water Protector Legal, to our website, and there's a direct link there, because we think it's some of the most important work that we do. But I think acting in solidarity across those lines is incredibly important, and it allows our light to shine brighter, and it also sometimes, when those people are in those situations and their lights are dimming, it can give a little more fuel to their fires. So that's really what I wanted to say. I could talk some more about details of WPLC's current work. Sort of, I don't want to say post NODAPL, because there still are, we still have, well, now we just got one more. People might have seen in the Bismarck Tribune, a new NODAPL case has started. I have some thoughts on that is not going to go anywhere, but that would make it There are 40 outstanding cases, and there are currently 3 before state court here, and we are dedicated to representing or finding representation for all of those people. Those people are on warrant status, so they could be anywhere, and maybe stopped and brought in. So probably over the next 3, 5, 10 years, or forever, we'll continue representing those cases. And then additionally, struggles that have, I don't want to say entirely born, but struggles that have been inspired by the Standing Rock No DAPL water protector movement. In South Texas, people are organizing in Arizona and New Mexico. People are currently in camps in Louisiana. People probably know that people are standing up against development of sacred places in Hawaii, but all of those are, in my belief, have been directly inspired by what happened here. And those are things that folks here, and we certainly will be supportive and standing in solidarity with those folks. But we have time for folks to talk and have questions and comments and answers. But thank you, and thank you for inviting me here.
So you said that, we will win. So, honestly, it doesn't feel that way sometimes. So can you talk more about, more about that?
I'll tell you this. It actually, some friends of mine from an amazing organization, you should check them out. It's called Dream Defenders, and they work out of Florida. But they have the best T-shirts, the best movement T-shirts ever, so you should get their T-shirts. They have a T-shirt, and it says, "I've been to the future, we won," a little bit what I just said I stole from them, from a T-shirt. So if we had a time machine, and we went to, well, let's say I had a time machine, I go to the future, and I know the answer to your question. So really, it can only be 2 things. We win, or we lose. If I came back and I said, you know what, all of this stuff, all of what's happening, these alt-right people, which just is fancy for Nazi, neo-Nazi, right? Or, Ku Klux Klaner, depending on where you are. What if I said we lose? And it's horrible. It's really horrible. I don't know what you would do. I would probably fight harder, right? I'd be like, we're not going down like that. That's not the way this is going to end. And at least if we know, I don't know, the Navy says we're going to go down with the ship, we would still do that, right? And if I said we win, I know that we win. I'm not going to tell you when, but we do. You'd be like, well, great, we're going to win. Let's go and fight like hell, right? So either way, we do the same thing. Right? Both ways, you're like, well, I would just fight harder if that were the case. And the thing that I say a lot of times when I have to folks that Black, brown, indigenous folks who are really directly, daily experiencing oppression, women, LGBTQ folks, is I say, our forebears fought not because, and I'll say, my great-great-grandparents, if the ones, and so I'm multiracial, but the ones that are indigenous and the ones that are Black, they fought And I'll say for the ones that were black, they, some black folks, their ancestors actually were running through the woods. They were being chased by torches and dogs. And that great-great-great-grandmother wasn't going, oh, someday my great-great-great-grandson will be a lawyer, or someday they'll be a doctor, or someday they'll have a really nice house in a really fancy place in the city. They were not thinking those things. What they were thinking of is they will be free, right? And that struggle, the struggle for the existence of indigenous people in this country, right? All of those struggles were massive struggles. The fact that indigenous people exist in this country now is, in a church, is absolutely miraculous. It is a miracle, right? And that struggle, compared to the one, I don't want to say I'm going to say it's less. The struggle that we have today is less than the struggle that black people struggled for liberation and that indigenous people had simply to exist, right? So the struggle that we have today, our great-great-grandparents would look and go, really? Really? Like, we did all of that, I'm going to swear, we did all of that shit, and you're complaining because of what? Of this? No, that's not why we fought. So right now, and I'll be spiritual because it's the thing that we can do, and we should, and I'll say, we need to believe that we can do it. If you don't believe that we can do it, if we were, I've said this before, but if we were a bunch of civil engineers, and we said, we're going to go build a bridge, it's going to be a really nice bridge, but all you guys, I'm going to get to the hard part, you guys don't believe it. You're just the engineers who think, I don't really think you can build a bridge that big, I don't think it's going to work. We should have a conversation with them. We should say, you really need to believe that this is going to work. You really need to understand that this can happen, because otherwise we're not going to be able to do it. And I believe, because my ancestors told me, that we actually can live in a society with people. And I also believe in people. If we believe in human rights, we kind of have to think that humans are worth that, right? Even the ones who, like your crotchety, it's not my uncle, it's my second cousin of mine, but you're really racist second cousin who's just you really don't go to holiday things with them anymore because they have the red hat. Anyway, but we have to believe that. So I think it's an operational requirement.
So our closing words, Erak Oroya Montano. How are we transforming ourselves and living our values while we fight to be liberated and free? What is the internal work we're doing that shows up in the external struggle?
We shall be known by the ones who sow and reap the seeds of change alive from deep within the earth. It is time now. It is time now that we thrive. It is time we lead ourselves into the well. It is time now. And what a time to be alive in this great turning. We shall learn to lead